Those of us who've been in therapy since we're 17, we can spot you a mile away.
Get out of here. You're the first person who's ever guessed it, I think.
I win. I win the therapy game.
Hey, this is Kara, and you're watching Really Famous, where you get to know your favorite celebrities on a really intimate level. Because, you know, I was a therapist. So today you're going to get to know MAYIM BIALIK. MAYIM opens up about her struggles with anxiety, depression, and OCD, and you will really get to know her. If you want to tap that like button, that would be amazing, and drop a comment below about what you really like most about MAYIM. How are you holding up emotionally? I know you have you have all your YouTube videos and you have a lot of things. You have a lot of outlets which are good for your mental health.
Yeah. I mean, I think you know, it's been a little bit complicated. This time has been a little bit complicated in terms of like what outlets to use, also because of the Black Lives Matter movement, which has taken up a lot of our minds and hearts. And, you know, as Dave Chappelle said in his special, like, you don't really need to know what every celebrity is thinking. Like the streets are speaking. The streets are telling you exactly what they're thinking. Yeah. So I also have, you know, I've turned my platform over a little bit to some friends and, you know, some people who have, you know, direct experience and are voices that need to be amplified. It's been a little bit hard though to figure out, you know, kind of what to do. I don't really consider that, honestly, you know, my outlet. It's an outlet for certain things, but okay. You know, for me as a person who's, you know, been very vocal about living with mental health challenges really my whole life, and as someone who you know, worked in the field of neuropsychiatry as part of my thesis. Right. And I'm actually starting a podcast called Bialik Breakdown, where I can say, welcome to my breakdown, where we're going to be breaking down, you know, myths, misconceptions, and, you know, a lot of fallacies about the way we think about mental health. So it's something I've actually spent most of the quarantine specifically thinking about. And as a mom of 2 kids, like my concern is also how are they doing and how much can they tell that I'm not always doing well? And the answer is quite a bit. They know. They know when mama's anxious because there's a, you know, pandemic. So it's been a lot of balancing that.
So, okay, so much to talk about from what you already mentioned. So let's just go with the most recent, which is, yeah, I mean, it's a pandemic. So of course they can feel what you're feeling. So like, do you try to shield them a little bit or what?
I mean, I think, well, shield is a complicated word. You know, I grew up, and many of us grew up in a very different time where our parents tried to make us think that they had everything figured out, and therefore we should listen to everything they said because they had it all figured out. And while there are definitely things that adults do have figured out, and listening to parents is very important, what I realize now and learned as I became more of an adult and did more therapy myself is that my parents are just people who were older and still working their stuff out. But they parented at a time when that was the notion. Like, I'll tell you when you're hungry. I'll tell you when you're happy. I'll tell you when you're cold, put on a jacket. And I think that like a lot of quote progressive parenting, which is for me is not equated with helicopter parenting or, you know, being up in your kid's business all the time, but being able to say like, wow, we are both separate beings. You are not an extension of me. You're my child, but I'm going through things, you're going through things, and we're going through it together. So while I think that there's age appropriate information for children to have, both about what's going on in the world and what's going on in my head and my heart, you know, social media has taken over our world and our teenagers, especially in ways that none of us anticipated. My son is seeing anti-Semitic stuff on TikTok just because that's where he's hanging out and that's what's going on. So like, that's something I just realized, oh, okay. So even if I'm not getting information to him, it's coming at him. And people are going to be like, it's the same. Like when you would hear it on the playground. It is very different because the playground is not connected to the interweb. Yeah. It's not connected to the rest of the world like that. So I definitely try and be honest with my children. And I think that's where you have to decide what's shielding and what's not. Because if you tell children you're okay, but you're not, they know. And they don't always know that you're not okay. They know that what you're telling them and what they're feeling don't match. And that mismatch can be very, very upsetting to children. It can make them feel like they're going crazy. And they're not going to put their finger on it at 5, at 7, even at 15. But that's what I try and do. I try and match for them that even if I'm going through something that they don't have full access to, I say, I'm having a hard one. Today's a hard one. here's what we're going to do. We're not going to put extra pressure on whatever. We're going to order in, or we're going to take a walk. We're going to all have separate quiet time, whatever it looks like.
Yeah, but also, right. So that's so interesting what you're saying about the mismatch too, because then they don't really trust themselves. Or they question their own intuition or ability to feel what somebody else is feeling. And I mean, a very important someone else, but also I think that teaches them that they can be like that too. Like they can have those days because they're going to have those days for the rest of their lives. So I totally hear what you're saying. So just so you know, I used to be a therapist, so I am totally pro therapy and very
I know
interested in this whole. Oh, you know?
Yes.
How do you know?
I can tell by how you talk.
Oh, are you serious?
Yes.
What did I say?
Those of us who've been in therapy since we're 17, we can spot you a mile away.
Get out of here. I did not. I never would have thought that. You're the first person who's ever guessed it, I think. I mean, people have told me like after we've talked, oh, I feel like we just had a therapy session, but
no, I got it.
You're the first one.
I win. I win the therapy game.
Okay, good. So I'm glad I disclosed so that you know.
Everyone knows.
Yeah, but I am right. So I'm very pro therapy and I'm very pro figuring things out, talking about your feelings, thinking about things from that angle because that's life, right? Yeah. So yeah, okay. So let's back up also, speaking of which, you had a very interesting childhood. So I heard you on a podcast recently. It was Stephen Levitt's podcast, right? Stephen Levitt?
Yeah, Steve Levitt.
Right. Okay. It was so great. I was really just you were such an interesting guest and just talking about all these real things. And I just loved it. And I appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I had a wonderful time with him. Yeah, Steve Levitt's the Freakonomics guy, as people know him. He's at University of Chicago. And that was actually one of my favorite interviews. I'm sure this will be a close second.
Let's hope. I hope so. So, all right. So you were talking about your childhood with him and very interesting. So I hate to ask you to kind of repeat the same thing you talked about, but for those of, us who haven't listened to that, maybe you can tell me, like, walk me through. So it impacted who you are now, for sure. You were worried a lot, right? There's mental illness in your family. So I'm not going to say it.
No, I mean, I kind of want your analysis, honestly. I skipped
I'll give
therapy
you my analysis,
yesterday.
but you have to give it to me fresh. But I still will if you want.
Okay. So, I mean, I don't remember exactly, which parts of everything I talked about, but, I can tell my story kind of in a nutshell. I'm a second generation American, and that is a big part of my story. My grandparents came to America during the pogroms that preceded the onset of World War II. So on my mom's side, like, my grandmother was an orphan when she came to this country. Half of her siblings had died in the war, and she was separated from her remaining siblings. And my mother's father was from a small town in Poland, and he had, both my grandparents left school. I don't even think my grandmother finished elementary school. My grandfather left at 15. So my mom's side of the family, they met at night school. They barely spoke English. Night school didn't work that well. And my mom grew up in poverty. Like, my mom grew up in a tenement house. She was born during World War II in the Bronx. And on my father's side, a little bit more of an assimilated story. My father's mother was from Warsaw, came over as a young girl, and my father's father was American, my only American-born grandparent. And my dad had more of like an assimilated 1950s, Jewish American. They moved to Long Island and all those things. My father was also born during the war. And I was raised, by these two people who both came from crazy, I mean, they did. And there's mental illness on both sides of my family. And my parents got married very young. My mother was 18. She was not pregnant. And she left Orthodox Judaism. And, they were these bohemian artists. And when I was born, they were literally sleeping in my grandparents' living room. Like, we weren't living somewhere at that time. And they were hippies, they were public school teachers, they were civil rights activists. And I grew up in Los Angeles, but I grew up like a New Yorker. They raised me like we were in New York. That was, they made me talk like I was like, they corrected my speach.
Wait, to have a New York accent, you mean?
Yeah, I was corrected.
Really?
Yeah, I was corrected to speak like they speak. And, we like hit the penny in the street. Like, we had, bottle cap races. I grew up without a lot of money. We never owned a house in my life. I grew up with one bathroom for 4 people, and there are people who have it a lot worse than I do. But where I grew up, that was unusual. I was part of the busing program, the magnet programs of the 70s and 80s, where they took kids like me who came from rented houses with one bathroom for the whole family. And, I went to school in places where they had many bathrooms and different cars and,
Wow.
and I was a very, I was a quirky kid. I was definitely outgoing. I talked a lot. I was a problem solver. My nickname was Freud. I was the one in the family, like making my parents makeup and trying to make sure all the pieces, were in place. And my parents did the best they could. Absolutely. But I was a child that I was very, very anxious. I started experiencing more proper depression, I'd say probably in middle school. And, I'm a person with OCD, and I fall on the mild moderate, but certain things that are moderate are definitely more problematic. And I didn't know that's what it was. Like, a lot of kids have things they do. As I got older, and as doctors kept saying, like, why are you so this? Why are you, do you have a number? I said, of course I have a number. Who doesn't have a number? I got to touch things that number of times. And the doctor was like, very interesting.
Oh,
Let me ask
so
you some more questions.
Wait, so you didn't know then, like, it just didn't feel I mean, of course it was uncomfortable, but it wasn't that level of, like, you weren't worried about worrying, or were you?
No, I didn't know. It was just normal. I mean, I think, like, and that's what's sort of, both beautiful and disturbing about being a child. Like, what you grow up in is absolutely normal. Like,
normal.
It's normal. So, like, the things that we do, the things that any of us do, those are the things to bind anxiety. And some houses are more anxious than others. And I definitely grew up in a house with a lot of uncertainty, a lot of anxiety, financial insecurity. My dad was a frustrated artist. He was a public school teacher. So was my mom. Like, there was a lot. There was a lot, and there was a lot for me to be anxious about. And, in families like mine, like, the Holocaust looms large. It really does. It's like, it's a big part of, I grew up speaking Yiddish. Like, my grandparents never really spoke English very well. I mean, they got by, but, I grew up
They talk about it a lot. They talked about, like,
no, my grandmother would not talk about it.
Your parents would.
My parents and it was just like, it was known. Yeah. You'd hear like bits and pieces. And I've actually learned more from my great aunt, who's the last living member of that side of my family. I've learned about more aunts that I had that I never knew, who died, and, like, just people I never knew, because my grandmother, she could not talk about it when I tried to get her to. I mean, she was one of those women who was always crying. She never recovered. And there are amazing people who come through what she came through and have a new lease on life, and they're very religious and excited. And that just wasn't my family's story. So it was just this, like, sadness that, was always with her. And a lot of tension. There's a lot of tension on both sides of my family. And look, nobody talked about feelings. Like, it's not really a surprise, like, no one talked about feelings. It just wasn't what we did, it wasn't what my parents did in their childhoods, and there wasn't time for that,
But you are so like that now.
That's a lot of therapy.
Yeah.
That's a lot. I mean, that's a lot of therapy. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of writing, and it's literally making my self-care, really my number one priority. It's what enables me to be a parent. I mean, I have to do it for my kids. I don't love going to therapy. I mean, well, most days I do, but I don't love having my week eaten up by all the self-care I have to do, but it's so that I can show up for my kids, and not be a wreck,
Yeah.
Especially right now.
So yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, more than ever. So that's so interesting though. So then your nickname was Freud. So who named you that?
I guess my parent, I mean, like they said, I was always solving problems. Like,
you're solving problems, analyzing things, I guess, right?
Yeah, of course.
Big time. Well, you obviously that you've always done. That's just part of who you are, I think. Mm-hmm. And so then why did you start seeing a therapist then? Was it that middle school depression?
I'm trying to think. No, it was I wish that I had started seeing someone in middle school. No, it wasn't until I was almost out of high school that I actually got help. I think the average number of years it takes for someone to get help after onset of symptoms is like 11 years or something like that.
It's forever, right?
It's forever.
Normal.
So, I mean, there were things, there were things from very early that were signs that you didn't know to look for anything, And when I was a very late bloomer, and when I started getting my lady cycle, my moods started kind of ricocheting about, which is actually not, now that I know, like, it's not unusual when you're first starting to have all that leveling out of hormones, but for me, it felt really, really deep and really, really dark. And that's when I got help. I started having panic attacks, like proper panic attacks, not the kind of panic attacks, forgive me, that a lot of people talk about, like, OMG, I had a panic attack because he was late. And it's like, no, if you have panic disorder, you know that very specifically you think you need to go to the hospital because you're dying.
It feels like a heart attack.
It feels like a heart attack. It feels like right. So physiologically, it feels like a heart attack. But at 16, 17, I didn't even know what heart attack felt like. I knew that I thought if I didn't go to a hospital that I was going to die in the street. Like, that's what it feels like. So that was happening. So that's really that's when I first, went and proper got help.
Got it. Okay. So that's so interesting. So then you still have therapy today, but it helps you with different things. So do you feel like you figured yourself out? Like, you feel like you figured all that initial stuff out?
I have not had a proper panic attack in many years, which is really wonderful, because part of panic attacks, which are different than anxiety attacks, is that the fear of having your next one is enough to set it off again. And that actually distinguishes it from it. Right. That distinguishes it from anxiety attacks, which you can be like, oh my gosh, I don't want to have another one. Panic attack, like, you can give yourself another one from being afraid you're going to have another one, like, another day. So that has not happened in a long time. I first got not good help. I was turned over by my internist to a psychiatrist. And while psychiatrists are very good at what they do, what I needed was a talk therapist. And I didn't even know to ask for that. So, I eventually, I like to say I've been in the right therapy since I was about 20. So it took a couple years of sort of, trying to figure it out. And being given medication, which absolutely helped me stop thinking I needed to go to the hospital. But working through a lot of that, yes, it takes a very long time. And the kind of stuff, that I live with and have lived with and is in my DNA and in my epigenetic system, I really do believe I want to be processing really for my life. Like, I'm a strong believer in psychotherapy, and there have been times in my life where I've done cognitive behavioral therapy for specific things, or, specific behaviors and things. But I really do believe in talk therapy, and I'm very grateful that I can afford it. And it's actually one of the things that drives me most in working in mental health, is the fact that it should be something everyone has access to, and not just people who can afford it. And I'm sure you know a lot about that.
Absolutely. It's so important for, like, practically everybody to have access. I think
everyone at some point, and I'm not saying everyone needs to be in therapy forever, like I plan to be. But when you've experienced a death, the solution is not, you shouldn't feel what you're feeling, take this pill. The solution should be, what does grief look like? Let's talk through what grief looks like, what it feels like, and what you can do so that it doesn't become something that is so dark and dire that we might need, to use pharmaceutical intervention. I think in our culture, we're so uncomfortable with feelings that when people experience grief, for like when my father died, bless his memory, like, of course there were elements of depression, but it's called grief for a reason. It is the set of emotions, thoughts, and behaviors that allow us to process an enormously significant loss. Grief can become depression, but in its acute stages, it does not necessarily need a pill. And I remember when my father died, people were like, "You going to take something?" I said, "No, I'm going to grieve. Like,
I'm surprised people even ask that, because that is you have to process it. I thought, like, people generally knew about grief, if not just life.
No,
grief
I don't
specifically,
think so.
You need to get through it, not, you can't go
Over
around
it.
it.
Right.
Over it. That's it. And I was like, it's
Yeah.
right up here. I'm remembering, but I'm not. So super helpful. And a combination too is often what does the trick when it's something that, like you said, it's in your DNA. It's something you're going to be
Sure.
dealing with your whole entire life.
Right.
So like, okay, so your podcast so it's taking a mental health angle. So what's the angle?
Yeah, the angle, well, the angle is it's me. No, the angle is,
Well, that's a good angle. It's definitely a good one to go with.
No, the angle is, and I should mention, it's bialikbreakdown.com is our website. And
I signed up for notifications already.
Oh,
so
great.
Everybody
Thank
else
you.
can too, and they'll
That's
be just like,
great.
yeah,
Thank you. Yeah, the angle is that, there are a lot of resources, and we all know the websites and the places, that people go and the places we're told to go, but many people don't even know why they need help or if they need help. And so what I'm trying to do is literally break down some of the basic diagnoses. I mean, I'm sure you've heard this during the quarantine. I can't tell you how many people don't even know that they're anxious, and they're describing all these things and why am I feeling this? And why is this happening? And it's like, look what's going on in the world.
Sure.
There are many different feelings that are going to come up, and some of those feelings get translated into physiological things that happen in our bodies. So the idea is to sort of break down basics surrounding mental health, not so that we can diagnose you and give you a pill or tell you what pill to ask your doctor for, but to also be able to take a more holistic approach, literally to say, what's the whole picture? What are the things that contribute to mental health problems that many of us are never told about? And even things like diet, like meditation, like massage, like exercise, like things that we're not told to go to first. And in addition to, we're often just told now, here's the pill, or you'll figure it out, it'll get better, call a therapist. That's not working for so many people. So the idea is also to build this breakdown site into hopefully a reference point where people can learn more about the individual things we talk about, and also start to build a community of help and support.
Okay, so it's beyond a podcast that you're really like developing a whole community.
That's my hope. The only reason I would ever consider going into politics would be for mental health advocacy and for legislation to increase resources and support. Because I believe that it's a human right to be educated about your mental health, so that you can have access to the resources you need. It should not be, something just for the elite. And it shouldn't be something that only certain people get to know about. We all deserve to know what trauma is. And, much as I appreciate, again, kind of like OCD and panic attacks and PTSD, people throw these terms around. What do they really mean? Where is it significant? And when do you really need to ask for help? Trauma is a significant aspect of many people's lives, and we've only really started talking about it out in the open in the last 5-10 years. Trauma is a real thing, and trauma doesn't happen overnight, except when it does. And usually trauma gets triggered later from earlier things. Like, that's a whole thing, but that's your human right, to get to know all those parts of yourself.
Well, you really know your stuff, I must say. You are like, I know you got a PhD in, what is it, molecular biology?
No, neuroscience.
No. Neuroscience.
Yep.
Sorry. I know you have your PhD in that, but it seems to me like you're quite educated and knowledgeable.
I absolutely paid attention in therapy and continue to. And also, I've used the services of organizations like NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, to help me through situations and help me through situations with family members. So I've also, learned from the kind of support that they give.
Yeah. So, okay. So for somebody who's so like a finger on the pulse and understands it and analytical and ups and downs and all of that, how on earth do you deal with Hollywood and like the ups and downs of the entertainment business?
I guess not as well as I could, and better than I used to. I think that, both having 12 years in academia and living in that kind of world, and, valuing mental health and self-care over anything gives a tremendous amount of perspective for the work that I do. I know that I'm not curing cancer, as a comedian, but, I also, we all have our talents and our gifts and the things that people encourage us to be part of. And, I kept leaving acting, and it kept, pulling me back in. So, there's aspects to having an understanding of the psychology of people that is helpful no matter what you do. It's helpful as a parent.
So
you know,
true. Yeah.
Yeah. And like knowing yourself is the best way to, I think be successful. And I don't mean in terms of finances or, working your way up the corporate ladder, successful in terms of interacting with humans. Like that's what we're here to do. We're not here to win Emmy Awards, and we're not here to, have that written on your, your gravestone. Like we're here to interact with humans, because that's what we do as humans. So for me, like that just makes me more patient, more tolerant, more compassionate of other people, my understanding of people's limitations. And I believe that hurt people hurt. So, I get hurt a lot, and usually it's by people who have been hurt, and that gives me a sense of compassion and also, kind of perspective.
Okay, that's interesting. So most of the people who have hurt you have been hurt. Tell me about that. I know that's such a therapist thing to say. I'm not sorry.
No, I mean, that's something I've heard that I've found to be true. As parents, we are taught, in progressive psychology and positive psychology that, children are trying to get their needs met. They'll do anything they can to get their needs met. And if you don't hear them asking gently, they're going to ask louder, and they're going to ask rougher, and they're going to ask by tugging, and they're going to ask by throwing things, right? So the key is, how do we learn, their earlier signals for what they need? And I think the same is true of adults. I really do. We're all trying to get our needs met. And people who have had a rougher go at kind of building that scaffold, of their security, their confidence, that's where things can go awry. And that's what we carry on to all of our relationships. And I think we see it when we say, like, I don't want to be like my parents. And then we find ourselves being like our parents. And there are many ways that I'm happy to be like my parents. And there are a lot of ways that I've had to work really hard to do it differently. And that doesn't mean that I don't appreciate what they did. My mother's always like, why does it always have to be that you blame me? But the fact that I became a vegan doesn't mean that it was wrong that she fed me meat and dairy. Sure. It means that I get to make my own way, and I get to live literally my own life. And I think in my family, and in particular ethnic families in particular, and immigrant families, you do get a lot of enmeshing. You get a lot of sticking together, and nobody understands us, and let's keep it all in the tribe, and no one needs to know what's going on. And it makes for a lot of secrecy. It makes for a lot of gossip, and that's it. Many people turn out fine. I happened to be the kind of kid that was deeply affected by that kind of confusion and tension. And so I get to do it my own way, also with my, parents in my life. And that's a challenge too,
Yeah. And that reminds me too. So you said a highly sensitive person, right?
I'm an HSP. Yeah. I found out, cause my younger son, I gave it to him. I infected him with HSP.
But were you like, this is me, and I totally know this? And then finally there was something that explained.
Oh yeah. Like once I saw that acronym, it felt really good to know that like it's a real thing.
Yeah.
And my whole life I was told, you're too sensitive, you're too emotional, calm down, blah, blah, blah. All those things, which just made it worse, just made me feel crazier. I was in a significant car accident 8 years ago. And after that, a tremendous amount of literally trauma stuff surfaced. I became sound sensitive. I became and I was like, what is happening? I've lived my whole life not thinking of how loud a fire engine is. Like, why is this my life? So it's so interesting to have a child who did not experience, thank God, a car accident or that kind of trauma, and just was like that naturally. So the two of us together, when fire engines pass, we both go like this. Like,
so interesting. So that's
I cover his ears, he covers mine. Yeah.
So interesting. It's a physical response to physical like sounds and light and things like that, not emotions of like. Because I was thinking when you first talked about it, you're right. I was thinking about how you feel. Really, it's empathy to the nth degree.
With me, it is everything to the nth degree. Like that's how a lot of people describe me. Like all the feelings at 100, and I'm really grateful I found other friends like that. I have a friend, Abby, who's like this. And like when we became close friends, really just in the last, 5 or 10 years, like we were so happy to find each other, but it's a lot of emotional information with us, like all the feelings, so many feelings, like crying when we're happy, crying when we're sad. When you put us together, it's like all the time. And you obviously shouldn't marry someone like that or, hang out with someone like that too I've had people tell me that, like I hear things differently, meaning I hear what they really think. Like people have admitted to me, partners, boyfriends have said, I didn't want you to know that that's what I was saying, but you figured it out. I just hear it. Like I hear with my heart is how I say it. It's very strange.
Right.
It's a superpower.
That is interesting. But I think that, I don't know if that's connected to that or if it's just you really being in tune with.
To me, it feels like, well, I appreciate that. To me, it feels like a deep, deep connection to emotional content, whether it's coming in, whether I'm putting it out, it's a deep connection and it's an emotional attachment also to physical things that occur in my environment. Yeah, like I said, I hope it's a superpower.
Yeah, I would think, right. So it could be a gift and a curse, right? It could be both things, but but one with the other. So is that interesting for your friend for you to see what you are like on the other side? I mean, you probably see it more with her, I would imagine, than your son, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's different because when you're parenting, you are tasked with, helping someone else regulate it. And kids can get overwhelmed by those feelings because they haven't named them yet. They don't know what they are. And I remember the first time that Fred felt fluttery in his chest, and he literally described it. He had zero idea what was happening. He's like, it feels like something's building. What's building in my chest? Why does it feel like that? And it was so interesting and also like a wonderful point to be able to say like, hey, I get it, And I remember that night when I was tucking him in, he was like, I'm so glad you're like me. Cause like you understand. And I was like, oh, and my ex-husband, we have a really beautiful relationship. We work very hard at it. He's not necessarily like that, which you can't have two people who are like that, but it's so sweet that like, I can hold those things in a different way and, and he can hold different things. And even though we don't live in the same house, like we're still co-parenting, these people, like we're their parents. So it's really cool that he'll say like, oh, this child, he's just all the feelings. And I'm like, I know.
But I bet he's also like, yeah, I know about this. This is nothing new for me.
Oh yeah. And like Fred, my little one, he's more of like, when he gets angry, like, it, he will throw something. And like, that's me, like I was a thrower. And my ex-husband's like, I don't understand. Just don't throw things when you're mad. And I said, if it were that easy, like, but I get it, I really get it. And that's also, that's why apparently we have children is because we're not done growing, we're not done growing. And that's what I get to say to my kids. Like, I've never parented you today. I've never known you when you're this days old. And when I'm this age, like here's our first day, here's our first day doing this day.
And I think that it's so important to realize that you're always going to be growing, and not only to realize it, but to accept it and want it and celebrate it, because I think it's the day that you stop doing that really problems can start on a bigger level, because we're always evolving. We're always learning, and there's always new information coming in.
But I think the problem is like, no one told me that. Like when I was a kid, I thought, boy, life is hard and I'm very moody and I like reading French, existential philosophy. And one day I'll stop feeling so conflicted and I'll find the man who I will spend the rest of my life with and everything will be great. And no one said to me what you and I are talking about, which is now what I tell my children, my friends' daughters, the kids that I get to, not physically, but be around. Like, life is about a constant process of getting to know yourself. And you will get to points where you feel more resolved, more confident, more loved, more loving, more beautiful, less crazy. But ultimately, I'm a big kid. I am a gigantic kid who's stuck in a 44-year-old body today, and I'll be 45, and then I'll be 45 and figuring it out. But when I hear women like, when I was 55 is when I really got to know myself. I'm like, what?
Yes.
I don't know. I want to know now so that I stop having nightmares sometimes and I stop worrying and like, why are my knees saggy? Who wanted saggy knees? Like what?
Yeah, this is called life. And like, it's good to hear women who are 55 or 75 and telling you about when they were 55 was when they started to get it, right? Because then it shows you, those are like role models for you to see that, oh, so it's not about like, I am who I am and I'm going to be perfect and complete once I get the man. So like, how did that evolve for you? Wait, there's more. Mayim answers this question and opens up about her divorce, being a single parent, Hollywood, other people's opinions, coronavirus, vaccines, you name it. There's a lot more where this came from. Just tap on the card up here or tap on the link in the description below. I'm Kara. Please remember to subscribe for more intimate talks with your favorite celebrities. Tap that like button and drop a comment below about what you liked most about our talk today.